Alrighty, thanks Ella. Hi everyone, thanks for being here. My name is Gilbert Michaud. I'm an assistant professor of environmental policy at Loyola University in Chicago, and I'm also the ASES Policy Division Chair. So thanks for being with us. Today's webinar is entitled 1 Year in Navigating Solar Policy under the Trump Administration. For those of you unfamiliar with sort of the ASES Policy Division, just very quickly, we do a lot of different things. We sort of support our members that are doing energy policy work. Sometimes I field questions from folks in various states around net metering and RPS and this kind of thing. We also, run policy-focused sessions at our annual conference. We're actually planning for that right now. Folks want to come and hang out with us in Austin this October. We'd love to see you there. And we do webinars, right? It's been a while since we've done a webinar with the policy division, but it was sort of my turn, and happy to be with you all today. As I was thinking about what we should be talking about, we're sort of a year and change into the Trump administration, right? And so I've been fielding a lot of questions around tax credits, what's going on there, what's going on with the tariffs, maybe what are states doing to sort of overcome and mitigate some of the concerns at the federal level and sort of maintain momentum for solar deployment. So the goal of today's session, in essence, is to hear from 3 expert speakers that are on the ground doing that kind of work and have a deep understanding of sort of the policy and legal landscape surrounding solar energy. So happy to have 3 different speakers today. We have John Delurey, who's at Volt Solar, Managing Director of Campaigns. He's also here in Chicago with me and as a friend. Paul Michaud, who, yes, has the same last name as me. This is the first for me on a webinar, which is kind of fun. He's founder of the Michaud Law Group up in Connecticut. And Nick Montoni, Senior Program Director at the NC Clean Energy Technology Center. We're actually going to go in reverse order, even though that's how the names are listed in the registration form, et cetera. So we're going to start with Nick. We're going to have each speaker go for about 10 minutes or so, give or take. And as we're going through the conversations, feel free to type in any questions you have into the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to those at the end. The goal is to save about 15 or 20 minutes or so for Q&A and discussion at the end, if that sounds good to folks. So with that, I wanted to be brief in my remarks, but thanks for being here. I'm the moderator. Again, type in your questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll get to them at the end. Nick, you are up first, so I'm going to turn it over to you. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'm sharing my screen. I'm assuming everyone can see it. Just a quick intro. Hi, I'm Nick Montoni. I'm a Senior Program Director at the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. I will tell you a lot more about the Clean Energy Technology Center later in my presentation, but we are a public service center that's attached to North Carolina State University. We provide a really wide range of services, including policy tracking and analysis across all 50 states, technical assistance to local governments and businesses around the state of North Carolina and South Carolina, and a really wide range of other things. Before coming to the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, I was at the U.S. Department of Energy, and before that, I was in the U.S. House of Representatives. So very excited to put my federal policy hat back on for this conversation. So we're here to talk about sort of, 1 year in, what's the state of solar under sort of this federal policy paradigm. I actually wanted to think back a few years to remember like what the paradigm was before last year. So just as a quick reminder, what were some of the things that the Inflation Reduction Act did for solar? So as a reminder, there was the Section 48 investment tax credit for projects placed in service prior to 2024. That was then sort of superseded by the 48E ITC, which was tech neutral and based on any sort of carbon reducing, carbon neutral, carbon negative technology. That came with prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, a 10% adder for domestic content, and a 10% adder for energy communities. There was also the production tax credit, the 45 and 45Y. There were refundable tax credits for tax-exempt entities, so nonprofits, universities, state governments, so on and so forth. And then there was the 25D, which was investment tax credit for residential projects, right? So everything above 25D that I just mentioned was for commercial and utility scale. 25D was for residential. Um, Last year, and I'm sure many of us remember, last year there was a really big change to a lot of those things. Um, there was a full repeal of 25D for any projects not placed in service before December 31st, 2025. There was a full repeal of 45Y for projects that are placed in service after 2027 or beginning construction after July 6th, 2026. That's a year after passage of the bill. And this tax credit phases down pretty quickly through 2033. And then there was a repeal of the 48E tax credit just for wind and solar. And with the same placed in service or construction requirements. A couple of other quick tax considerations. Storage projects, which I think a lot of solar developers are thinking a lot about adding storage to existing projects or building their solar with storage now because our storage technologies have come a long way. So storage projects are still eligible for 48E and 45Y, but all projects, regardless of whether they are sort of grandfathered into these placed in service rules or whether they are still completely fully eligible for the existing tax credits, they are all facing more strict foreign entity of concern rules. And just a couple of examples of those rules are certain specified foreign entities or foreign influenced entities can't claim tax credits at all. And then any projects that are trying to claim these tax credits have to adhere to very strict limits on their materials and components sourcing. There are a few non-tax credit interesting policy points coming from the federal government in the last year or so. I think most notably was a memo from the Secretary of Interior. All solar projects, also all wind projects, but I know we're mostly talking about solar today, but all solar and wind projects on public lands are going to be under extremely strict scrutiny and have all of their DOI related elements have to be approved directly by the secretary. That's a huge bureaucratic hurdle because it means everything has to go all the way up the chain to him. That includes things like Bureau of Land Management rights of way, Endangered Species Act review, and National Historic Preservation Act reviews. Among, I think the checklist is like 26 different things, at least. That's the number that is sticking in my mind. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I'll also, a couple of other notable ones for solar. USDA put out a memo withdrawing support for projects on active cropland. I think that actually does affect some agrivoltaics work and some other work that farmers were trying to do to get solar on their own lands. And considering that about 70% of the REAP program, that's the Rural Energy for America program, 70% of that was solar. That's actually a pretty big reduction in funding for solar projects. And then in about the middle of last year, when the House passed the full year CR for FY25, DOE just completely reallocated their entire solar budget out of the solar office, and that was a reduction in funding of about $300 million from R&D and deployment activities. I'm sure there are other this is the broad strokes. I'm sure there are other things people were thinking of, or if you heard something and had a question about it, feel free to throw it in the chat. Because I'd love to see what others have noticed or heard of. But these were the broad strokes things from the federal government. I think, but we're here not just to talk about what's happening in the federal government. We're also here to talk about what the states are doing to respond. I know my two colleagues on the webinar are going to talk, I think, about specific case studies. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to tell you that if you're interested in learning what any state is doing, you can come ask the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. This is the range of services we provide. This is our mission. I'm not going to read it to you. I don't think you're that interested in our mission. But what I am going to tell you is we keep a public, free to use, consistently updated database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency. So if you are interested in any financial incentives at any level of government, if you're interested in regulatory policies, if you're interested in maps, if you want an API, you can find the incentives and policies that are of interest to you in your business, or how every state is dealing with solar energy. And it's not just all 50 states, it's also every territory, and a large swath of utilities across the country. I'll also do a quick flag for Desire Insight. We send out a series of quarterly reports. These are updated. These are forward-looking. So this is what bills are coming down the pike. What do we think is going to happen in dockets? A lot of policy analysis, regulatory analysis. We have data sheets that we update bi-weekly. Desire Insight, I will caveat, is not free and open to the public. You do have to subscribe, but it's a very useful resource. If you want to know more, these are the websites. You can get all of the interesting state information you want, but I know, again, the rest of the speakers on this webinar are going to tell you about more specifics in the states. And if you have any federal policy questions or any questions about Desire, please reach out to me. And I think that's all my slides. So I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
And over to Paul.
Thank you, Nick. Is it sharing yet? Oh, there it is. Okay, good. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Paul Michaud. No relation that I think to Gilbert, but we probably are related at some point in history. But anyway, I'm the managing member of Michaud Law Group. We're based in Middletown, Connecticut. We also have an office in Springfield, Massachusetts. Our law firm focuses exclusively on renewable energy and environmental projects. So we do a lot of, we do almost all solar, battery, storage, hydro, and because we have a strong environmental component, we also do a lot of work on brownfields. Our firm's been around for about 8 years. And next slide, Ella. I just want to talk just a little bit about what we do. So we're an interesting firm. We're a little different than we broke off from a larger firm, and so we're small enough where we really do end-to-end renewable energy work, project work. I mean, we literally do everything from project site control, origination, all the way through permitting, construction, investment, acquisition, sales. So we touch every aspect of solar projects, from an empty field or brownfield all the way through commercial operation. We do everything. Our main clients are solar and battery and developers, but we also do a lot of work with international solar and battery investment funds. Our biggest client is actually out of Switzerland, and they've committed about they've probably spent about 200 million just in Connecticut, and we've helped them with all their projects here. So again, we do end-to-end project development. It literally is nuts and bolts work that we do. Next slide, Ella. So Connecticut, I'm going to talk mostly about Connecticut, but it really applies to really all of New England. New England, they're kind of taking a regional approach to what's been happening under the new, under the Trump administration, with the, phase out of the ITC and the tariff and uncertainties. I just want to start out. So, and it's pretty true under the SMART program in Massachusetts, but I'm going to focus on Connecticut because they all kind of run the same way. Before the Trump administration, Connecticut, like the other New England states, we have our our solar and battery energy investment programs. I I show a turtle here because they kind of went along. The projects were our solicit. We usually do competitive RFPs and solicitations, and they're twice a year, and they're broken up into two tranches. And for the last 8 years, Connecticut and the other New England states have just been going along developing projects through competitive RFPs. And that's been working pretty well. Our projects range from really 200 kW, for the non-residential, all the way up to 5 megawatts. Plus, we have some larger projects that are under a regional RFP. But again, prior to the Trump administration, I consider our work to be more of a steady as you go turtle type work. Next slide, Ella. Then came along the Trump administration, right? And we know it in the elimination of the ITC and tariff uncertainty. Not all the ITC, but for solar, and a lot of uncertainty surrounding tariffs and everything. And what Connecticut decided to do, it's basically a two-prong approach. There's a short-term, they take a short-term look at it, but then also a long-term look at it. Again, Connecticut does everything by competitive RFP. You bid projects in, the lowest bid projects get selected. What they did in order to get as many solar projects in built as fast as possible under, while we still have the investment tax credit, was that they took our semi-annual RFPs that were 50 megawatts a piece and said, no, we're gonna put them all into one big RFP, an expedited RFP, and do all 100 megawatts like right away. And they right away went right to that so that we could get as many projects, through the gate as possible. And whatever's not selected in the current RFP, which is open now, they will have a second RFP in the summertime. But what they decided to do is actually take a full year's worth of projects, put them all in one expedited RFP, get them all through, push them through. And so that's what we're doing right now. We're right in the middle. Next week, the projects are due in Connecticut. There's 100 megawatts. We expect it probably to be fully subscribed. And I just show you here a real quick breakout of the different size projects and the tranches that they're all bid under separate bid tranches. So you could look at that there's large, medium, school, small, plus a residential component. Next slide, please. And the second thing that from a short-term perspective that the state of Connecticut did was, and they actually did it in conjunction with the other New England states, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, is they did it's called an expedited zero carbon energy RFP, where all the states in New England got together and said, any, projects 2 megawatts and up, whatever you have anywhere in New England or even in the ISO New England, or even in the New York ISO, submit it into this large RFP, and we'll see how many projects we can get in through the gate. And so that's underway right now too. And those are really for the larger projects, 20 megawatts, 30 megawatts. So, and that's an expedited zero carbon RFP. So again, in the short run, the idea is get as many projects through the gate as possible, get them built, and hopefully meet the criteria under the investment tax credit as you can. And these they include solar, but they also include batteries and wind, offshore wind also. So next slide, please. The long-term approach, so that's the short term. Let's get as many projects done as we can through these expedited RFPs. The long-term approach is because New England tends to do things in competitive RFP tranches, not under competitive tariffs. What they did was they took a look at the price caps. So all of our solicitations have price caps, and they tend to go down every year as the cost of solar goes down. What they did is in Connecticut, they took an analysis of the price caps where we were before the Trump policy, and they tried to figure out, okay, now that we have a lot of uncertainty with the ITC gone for solar and with tariff uncertainty, how can we make these programs continue and still thrive? And so what they simply did was they raised the bid caps on it. Across the board, approximately 26% increase in the bid cap from last year. So it's hard to see here, but the maximum bid caps all went up on average about 26%, and that's to allow for this uncertainty in the tariffs. And so the ultimate effect on that is we're still going to go forward. Projects are still they're still filling the queue. We're going as strong as we ever have. It's just that the sort of the average cost, for example, of a 5 megawatt solar project is going to go up a little bit. So that's going to be the effect. And they're just trying to be flexible and allow for that, that increase in the cost of the system because of some of these incentives going away. So they've raised it by 26%. That doesn't mean people need to bid the bid cap, but it gives developers room to do their projects and make them pencil. And so that's it. So that's the kind of the strategy that they're doing in Connecticut and really, all of New England. Next slide, please. I think that's all. Can you go back one more slide? Maybe I missed one. But the other, what I don't have here is, which I should have included, but is, let's see. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. I'm missing a slide here, but anyway, the other thing they did was they did do the expedited zero carbon RFP, and they did because that's completely competitive. They're allowing for projects just to bid what the market is. So again, short term, get projects in as fast as you can. Long term, just allow projects to bid at a higher price and accept that they may be a little more expensive going forward based on where we are currently. And I think that concludes my my presentation. With that, I'll hand it over to John. Or Nick. Go.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thanks.
I appreciate you all warming up the water for me. Hopefully I can do it justice. Great. So I'm tasked with spending the next 10 to 12 minutes bringing things down to the state level. And Paul, I have probably the least familiarity with the Northeast, so I appreciate you really leaning into that. I learned a lot. Vote Solar, for those who don't know us, is a nationwide solar and climate justice advocacy organization. Our goal is to write, pass, and implement good, equitable, effective solar laws. But we're probably only not called Vote Distributed Energy Resources because it didn't poll well in focus groups. We are not just looking at solar, we're looking at storage, virtual power plants. We're thinking about ways to reform interconnection. We're looking at ways of boosting access to clean energy writ large through large load clean tariffs. And so I just wanted to start with this probably entirely overwhelming slide of the different places we're doing our top 10 priority policies, which you see across the header there. The only acronym I should really spell out here is PBR on the right side. That's performance-based rate making. It's shifting utility incentives and structures to better align with the public good. Not expecting anyone to memorize this, and I'm happy to send the slides out afterwards. So I've been with Vote Solar about 6 years. Before that, I did some work in federal government on energy policy advising. I also was overseas working on off-grid solar electrification for a couple of years and was a community organizer with the Sierra Club, mostly working in rural electric cooperatives. But before all of that, I guess one of my first intersections with the grid was when I was 9 or 10, walking home from a friend's house and saw what I thought was molten lava dripping out of one of these pole boxes here, what I now know as a transformer. And so I ran home, called it in. They sent someone out. And as all the neighbors were gathering around watching this spectacle, one of my neighbors passed me $10 and said that his mom was on medical support at home. And if the power had gone out, he wasn't sure what would have happened to her. So it was an early lesson in how important the grid is to all of us. And I'll be talking a little bit about how I think the grid, which is the most complex machine we've ever made, is a big piece of the solution to get us to that affordable, reliable grid, primarily using local solar and local resources. Just a quick primer, because I think it's relevant for all talk of the different levers that Trump and his administration are pulling. Over the last couple decades, overall expenses on the production of energy have gone down. So this blue chunk on the left there, those are the O&M and capital costs of production, whereas the distribution grid has become more expensive and the transmission grid has become more expensive. Part of that is climate. Storms are getting more intense and more frequent. Part of that is neglect, just deferred maintenance in the grid. But a big piece of the affordability spike that we're seeing right now is the grid itself needing some TLC. TLC that I think local solar can provide no matter what the federal headwinds look like. So this past year, this past year, utilities asked for $31 billion, which is double what they sought the year before. This is what we're seeing in our power bills. I'm sure all of you attending have seen this in your power bills, and that trend line is not going to go down, especially with data centers on the rise, load growth looming. So a couple of the solutions that Vote Solar is hoping to throw at it is, one, to fully value the renewable energy resources we have. I thought Nick did a great job of flagging some of the other ways that the current Department of Energy is creating headwinds for solar. One of the ones that we're taking a close look at, especially when we start thinking about how utilities plan for and procure their power, is the forcing measures that the feds are taking to prop up fossil and coal plants in particular. So the Campbell plant is in Michigan, massive coal plant. Hard-fought win for advocates to shut it down, knowing that it was expensive and polluting. And it is not getting cheaper or less polluting, I'll tell you that much. But despite all that, the federal government has been imposing these 202C must-run orders to keep these coal plants alive. The real reason I've raised this, knowing that it's only solar adjacent, is because when we start thinking about integrated resource plans, which is where many utilities start to make their resource mix decisions, if you're sitting in DTE's shoes or Consumer Energy's shoes, and you have plants that are either currently under one of these must-run orders or will be soon, how do you plan for 15 years of an energy portfolio? In specific in Michigan, the last round of integrated resource plans were some of the first post the Inflation Reduction Act, which was poetic. Equally poetic, but in the opposite direction, is that these next IRPs happening this year that Vote Solar will be closely watching are some of the first post OBBA. And so this is where it's wonky weeds, but this is where the rubber hits the road for deciding what resources are going to be prioritized. Solar and wind are more expensive than they were a year or two ago without the ITC, with additional FEOC restrictions, but they are still dominating the landscape. There's a lot of uncertainty on the horizon, and a lot of that uncertainty gets baked into the models of these resource plans. So this is one key pressure point for advocates on the ground, is figure out how you can start nudging those. This is only a small slice of the ones Vote Solar plans I'm working on. There's one in Utah as well. And there is actually one in Illinois, which I'll touch on in my last slide. But this is a key pressure point, even in some restructured states like California. The last section was sort of about fully valuing renewables. This is about fully valuing local resources writ large and those grid benefits that I hinted at earlier. We are all in on virtual power plants. I suspect many of you are familiar with the concept, but just wanted to reiterate that there's sort of the old way of one big power plant pushing energy in essentially a one direction down to users. We're envisioning more of a community-based power network that people are generating their electricity, they might be storing it on site through batteries, and then they are pushing it back into the grid when the grid needs it most. The grid is overbuilt, right? We tend to use about 60% of it, and that's being generous. It is built for those 10 hours in the hot sun when we need it to really perform. Same with the big gas plants for the most part. It's built for those moments of extreme need. And so rather than pouring more money into building thicker poles and wires or more resilient infrastructure, what if we could help customers lead the way in that distributed energy future? This is obviously not to replace the need for utility scale wind and solar, but it is designed to complement it. And it, in many cases, is the fastest and cheapest way to put energy on the grid, even without the tax credits, because of how valuable those electrons are when they're needed most. If you properly value that type of exchange with customers and you organize them sufficiently, the tax credits can be a drop in the bucket. This is what we saw in Minnesota, where there was a pretty thorough value of solar investigation to figure out what that looks like when you add in all the different value stacks. But this was across the entire state, across all hours. We believe that this next chapter of renewables, and not just local renewables, but large scale solar, distribution connected solar plus storage, is getting more precise with when and where those electrons are needed most. And that's how you can more than make up for the value lost. So this little purple line here is that avoided distribution capacity cost. That's essentially saying, hey, by selling your excess rooftop power to a neighbor or the community solar power to a neighbor, that means we don't have to invest in the grid quite as much. So here we'll give you a couple fractions of a cent. We think that line can be a lot bigger. A lot of these lines can be a lot bigger, but that one in particular is undervalued because we've lacked precision. We're hoping to now gain that precision and fully leverage it through virtual power plants. And a lot of states are looking in that direction. This is more or less review of what I just shared, so I won't spend time on it, knowing that time is precious here. But going beyond just, hey, great, you're helping to displace this peaker gas plant on the grid, to, oh, great, that solar plus storage that you just installed in that community was in a part of the grid that we were about to upgrade anyways, and you've avoided that serious upgrade cost. So we'll add that into the value stack. So we're working on this in a lot of places as well. This is a very small slice of it, but it gives a fun taste of a few different places. In Arizona, there are vertically integrated utilities that hold a lot of sway, in part because it's an elected commission that oversees the utilities. We have a great pilot program for virtual power plants, and Arizona utilities are desperately trying to kill the fundamental economics of rooftop solar. This is something Vote Solar has protected for decades, trying to ensure that customers are effectively compensated for the solar they put onto the grid. And APS, Arizona Public Service, has done a great job of counteracting that. And we're having to fight them in multiple fronts right now. Xcel seems to be a little further along. This is a utility that's in Colorado and in Minnesota. They are thinking critically about what it would look like for them to own local resources on the distribution grid. They are starting to incorporate tax credit changes into all of that planning and still finding that those resources are valuable, especially when they might be displacing grid upgrades and infrastructure costs. And then the last one I'll flag is the largest in the country, which is, as far as I know, the California Demand Side Grid Support Program, which has been leveraged to tremendous success in recent years, but is contingent on public funding that has to be re-upped constantly, and it was vetoed by Governor Newsom. So the budget is severely hampered this year, which does not do us favors with those federal headwinds and with the affordability crisis. So I'll start bringing it to a close here. You might be asking yourself, hey, if these local resources are so great and so valuable, why don't utilities do them? And this kind of brings us back to that performance-based rate making item I hinted at earlier. Most utilities, primarily profit through the old way of doing things. So they're profiting from infrastructure, your classic poles and wires, grid hardening, putting lines underground, all very valuable stuff, but is not the cheapest or fastest way to address the changing grid. So we need to shift what is now often just a pass-through expense into something that utilities feel motivated to pursue, like virtual power plants. I had a whole spiel on Surja, which is the latest bill to make it out of Illinois. This was my last hurrah before pivoting from a more regional role to a more national role. But I think in the spirit of time, I will hold back just to make sure we've got room for questions. So thank you all. Looking forward to learning more from your perspectives.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, John. And thanks, Nick and Paul before that as well. It looks like we got about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. I want this to be sort of a attendee run discussion, so feel free to jump in with questions. I don't see any in the chat unless I'm mistaken. Ella, help me out if I'm missing something. Okay. So I think Ella, do folks have the ability to unmute and ask questions themselves?
Yes.
Okay, so folks can do that. Raise your hand if you'd like, and I'm happy to help moderate this. And I'm happy to ask my own questions too, but again, I want this to be your session. Any takers?
I think Donald has his hands up.
Oh, go ahead, Donald.
Question is a little far out, a step ahead of where you are. But what I see going on is our attention to maintaining electrical comfort, being sure that we have electricity to, one way or another, heat or cool where we put our people. But we pay no attention to having climate designed buildings, something we once called passive solar buildings back in my time. And I have studied and looked at where there are so many inhibitions to that, to our regulatory structure and our financial structure, all the way down to local design committees that regulate how streets are laid out. Is there any sense nationally of looking at this issue of how we can redesign the way we make buildings in order to avoid the necessity for the great distribution of electricity that we forecast as needed?
Anybody want to tackle that one? Good question about buildings. Yeah,
Nick,
go ahead, John.
especially if NC Clean Energy tracks anything building related, you might have a more direct answer.
I think we do track a wide variety of energy efficiency policy. I don't know that we track updates to building codes. We probably should. I think the thing you're getting at is for not every state has up-to-date building codes. And I know there's also been there's been pressure at the federal level to not update building codes or to whatever the opposite of update them is. So I think one thing to think about is, are your state's building codes up to date? And if they're not, how can they be updated with more considerations for energy efficiency and weatherization in order to get at this concern? And I think the other thing to consider also is what are federal and state level programs for weatherization? So even if it's not necessarily in the building codes and the standards, are there incentives and financial assistance for people to retrofit and update their living spaces and businesses so that they are more weather and climate adaptable? And I think almost every state has set up their Homes and Here programs, which are the federal rebates from the Inflation Reduction Act, which have not been clawed back. So that's good news. So keep an eye on those.
So we'll just add, I think there's a emerging recognition of the downside of the patchwork quilt of rules and regulation that we've created in the US. I think about that primarily from the solar side, where each municipality, each authority having jurisdiction is their own little fiefdom, and they kind of make their own rules typically, which is great for local control, but incredibly time consuming and costly when it comes to standardizing opportunities. It's one of the many reasons why Australia has installed solar costs that are a quarter of the installed solar cost in the US. And I think building codes and some of those issues follow similar lines. So figuring ways of starting to put parameters around those might help prevent the de facto ban that a lot of communities have created on things like passive solar. So eyes on the states, and hopefully a few states to lead on that to start standardizing a bit.
But there is no group pressure for this. Is that right?
I didn't catch the beginning of the question.
There is no group pressure for this, no visible organized pressure from the institutions we have.
It's not in Vote Solar's domain, and so I can only speak from my own like energy bubble. I'm not familiar with groups that are pushing hard on building codes or others.
I would look to the Alliance to Save Energy or the what do the A and the C stand for in ACEEE? The American Coalition for an Energy Efficient Economy. Yeah. I think ACEEE and ASE are good places to start.
Yeah, good suggestions, Nick. Other folks have questions or want to jump in?
I have a question. Oh, Trudy, you can go first.
Yep. So, John, tell us about the Illinois program, because I was just curious about that. If you could go back to that.
Yeah, sure. And I'll keep it as brief as possible because I could get lost in this story. But Illinois saw the writing on the wall with the affordability and reliability crisis that we're now facing head on. They in part saw that because Illinois is somewhat unique in that it is a restructured state so that it's all competitive market when it comes to power supply, and it's stuck between two different regional grid operators. You have PJM and MISO. And so Illinois saw some pretty devastating price spikes 2 or 3 years ago as a precursor to what we're now seeing across the country, and jumped into action and built out this was a 1,007-page bill called the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act that threw every solution we could imagine at the wall. So it does unlock virtual power plants. It also like shoots a couple bullets over the bow of those regional grid operators. It threatens that Illinois will take back control of that regional grid just to kind of spook them a little bit. It accelerates our energy efficiency standards. It increases time of use rates to help to figure out how to value those electrons, how they're valued in the market. But one of the key things, which relates back to my slides, is that it is going to be one of the first states to have that integrated resource planning toolkit when the utilities don't own the generation, right? So IRPs are almost exclusively in states that have vertical integration, where you have a regulator overseeing this process of the utility deciding which gas plants they're going to build or how much solar they're going to procure. In Illinois, it's still restructured, right? The state has no real lever or control over what gets built, but they do have different carrots that they can put out in the landscape to influence the market to provide more solar or more wind or more virtual power plants. And so we got a lot of experiments in this bill. It was just signed a few months ago, so it's too soon to tell exactly how things will shake out, but we hope that it creates a new roadmap for how to fully deploy the fastest and cheapest resources, which are renewables, and in particular, local solar and storage.
Well, it is too early to tell. Do you think it's going to be trend setting enough that other states will follow?
I hope so. I think I'm a little too biased and close to it for me to have a dispassionate view. I was in the trenches writing it and passing it. But you look to Massachusetts, they're currently pursuing a big energy omnibus that deploys a lot of similar solutions. I will say they're missing certain parts of it. Energy efficiency, I believe, is currently at risk in the Massachusetts bill. And so I think you have leaders flailing about looking for solutions to the energy affordability crisis. And in some places, they're getting it right. I think Illinois has largely gotten it right. Other places it's a little hit or miss. Some new governors in the East Coast, in New Jersey, Virginia, they have 8 great ideas and then one really questionable idea. And so we're all just trying to figure out how we navigate this next chapter.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you for the information.
Ella, did you want to jump in?
That was my question, but I'm not sure if this is maybe not the smartest question, but I do have another one. I feel like I'm actually from Boston, Massachusetts, and I know that that's a big energy efficiency renewables hub. Other than like the specific people that are in office, why is it one of the, I don't know exactly the question, but more like it feels like they're really on top of it all and ahead of a lot of the other states. Is there a reason just outside of, we're voting for those particular people to be in office and make those policy decisions? I'm not sure if there's like a weather reason or other things like that.
I grew up in Boston, but Paul, you're working in the Northeast more probably, so.
I think it's a lot of it is there's just a lot, there's a lot of academic institutions in Boston and New England, and it's very progressive in the Boston area, and I think they're just way ahead of the curve on everything. I mean, even compared to Connecticut, we're trying to emulate Boston because they're usually 2 steps ahead on everything with their SMART program and everything. I think it's just it's really a cultural thing. I think they're just really more progressive and on top of things that, scientifically, academically, and just ahead of the curve. Kudos to Boston. I mean,
I do hear from folks on the ground that one of the reasons why energy efficiency is at risk right now is because they have been ahead of the curve for so long, and their bills are fairly high. And if you look at an energy bill in the Boston area, there's a rider for each individual thing. And I don't know why this is on me as like the advocate, but why we have let utilities do that this whole time, of listing out grievances with each individual program that is legislatively mandated. And then they get to benefit from the savings on their side of the bill, right? Because it saves overall money when it comes to supply costs and some delivery costs, but it's drawn out very specifically. So the politics gets tricky when you see that you're paying $8 a month for energy efficiency, $15 a month for solar. I think there's a specific net metering charge on bills in Boston area. So it is not a huge surprise that they are also starting to get some political backlash as bills spike.
Thank you so much. Would you all say the top states that are most ahead of energy efficiency and just ahead of the curve in general is like Massachusetts, Illinois, and California? Or that might be hard to kind of quantify too. I just feel like I keep hearing those 3 states as the ones passing a lot of bills.
I would also send some love over to New York, for thinking creatively about a lot of things renewable. you might have like a second tier for some states like Colorado, Minnesota. You have other leadership out of the Northeast. But then I did want to, the reason I came off mute is like, kind of send a little bit of love to Texas. Like they are a sunny, windy state, so they are resource blessed when it comes to renewables, but they are also getting out of the way of those least cost resources and allowing them to deploy at rapid speed. And so their structure, their market allows resources to just eat the lunch of fossil because it's like proving ground that it is the least cost mix.
I think that's also true in other Southwest states and also, frankly, North Carolina. We are still fifth in the nation for solar deployment. So I think sometimes markets beat politics. And depending on the market structure in the state, sometimes it just makes more economic sense to build more solar. And that's definitely what happened in Texas. It's definitely what happened in the Southwest, and that is what happened in North Carolina, at least in the past decade.
Thank you so much. Good to
I'd
know.
agree with that. I've spent a lot of time doing policy evaluation work in my research and for my dissertation and such, and a lot of it is really, not to say that policy doesn't matter, because policy does matter in terms of tax credits and good net metering programs and such. But where we see a lot of deployment, honestly, frankly, is states that have high electricity costs and states that have, to your point, John, good resources, right? So states like California, Arizona, Hawaii, places with really high energy costs and a lot of sun, boom, that's a good like opening sort of sweet spot for deploying solar, and then the policy stuff maybe matters on top of that as well. So we have time for another question or two. If anybody has anything, type it in the chat or unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, if I may.
Yeah.
I appreciate all the insight and everything that everyone shared.
Oh no,
Do
I
we lose
can't hear you.
Ian? Yeah. Ian, you can type your question in the chat if needed, and I'm happy to read it to folks.
Sorry, is this better? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sure. I appreciate everyone's insight today. Ian Harris, originally from New York and new resident of North Carolina, so I was excited to hear that. Sounds like I picked the right state to move to. I guess just in general, I have a two-part question. I think we were all aware of the sort of the pizza pie and sort of the different actors in the process to get people to more energy efficient. And I'm curious if we are seeing states take more ownership of that process, given the lack of maybe federal clarity. And then I guess the second part of the question is, we are all keenly aware of the success and the benefits of solar. And I'm wondering if now the idea of battery is slowing down the implementation, or do we think it's speeding it up? I wonder sometimes if we are missing some quick and easy wins by making it more complicated than it needs to be, by including battery in some of these legislations and some of these projects on a larger scale.
So the first part of your question was, what are states doing on energy efficiency, given the federal government sort of backing off? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a leadership perspective, right? Are they sort of standing still? Are they pushing forward, right? I think we've seen.
I would say at least from like a really broad perspective of states, I think they are still pushing forward. Many states have energy efficiency resource standards. Many states, again, are, the federal government hasn't totally clawed back some energy efficiency funding. So many states are working to implement rebates for efficiency upgrades to homes. And they're pushing forward on that. And I think also in the sort of in the load growth conversation, which I don't want to have today in the next 4 minutes because we don't have time, but in the load growth conversation, I think a lot of states are considering energy efficiency as a tool in the toolbox. So it's definitely, I don't know, I'm sure some states aren't touching it, but I would say many, if not most states, are not shying away. I think to your second point, I don't, maybe others will disagree, but I think I don't think that including batteries and storage with solar necessarily slows things down or makes things convoluted or complicated. In fact, I think including storage with solar, especially new projects, or adding storage to old solar projects actually can improve the economics and can improve the value and the use cases. So I actually think that more solar developers and people who want solar should be considering how storage can be a factor in their how storage can help them meet their needs. Because I think you can still take advantage of some of the economies or tax credits and economies of scale with batteries that can maybe make your solar investment more valuable in the long run, even if you don't get a tax credit for it. So I think storage is becoming always a good idea, but I'll let Paul and John weigh in too.
Yeah, I think the trouble we're having in Connecticut, Connecticut's struggling with pairing batteries with solar, just trying to find that formula to monetize batteries to work with the solar. There's still the regulatory agencies, I mean, they're still struggling to come up with that formula to monetize it to make it work. And they haven't quite found it yet, but they're working on it. But I think that's the problem we're having, at least in Connecticut.
I really do think that storage unlocks solar's superpowers. I think we'll see that more and more as the grid gets hungrier and hungrier for power at certain times. And it shifts, like a lot of you are probably familiar with the duck curve we've been hearing about for 15 years, but it starts to really shift solar from this point where the grid is actually pretty well saturated in some places with renewables into when it's needed most, which is when everyone goes home and cranks up their air conditioning and turns on the TV. And then it also, like, smart inverters plus storage can provide additional grid benefits. Like you can have voltage and frequency regulation. It can provide some like black start capabilities to the grid. A lot of things that people have always said, oh, renewables can't do this, renewables can't do that. When you throw a battery on it, suddenly they can. And so the case study that I think about a lot is like there's 2+ gigawatts of community solar in the pipeline in Illinois. It should all have storage. You're clipping less, right? You're losing fewer electrons, and you're able to deploy those electrons when they're needed the most.
This is great. Good discussion, y'all. I'm looking at the clock and we only have a minute left. Ella, not to put you on the spot, but anything you wanted to share with folks about the conference or next webinars in the series or anything like that as we wrap up?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Gilbert and the Policy Division, and of course to you all speakers for joining us on this really insightful presentation. Yeah, as Gilbert said, we'll be hosting our 55th annual National Solar Conference on October 19th through 21st in Austin, Texas, in collaboration with the Texas Solar Energy Society, one of our state chapters. So yeah, super excited. Keep in touch and keep an eye out for registration on ases.org/conference. This webinar will be on the ASES YouTube channel shortly, and I'll also send a follow-up with the recording as well. Thank you all so much for your time, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, folks.
Ella, thanks,
Have a
Gilbert.
good one. Thanks again. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.